Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for another discussion with Sheela and Fatema Haque from the Unerased Book Club. We are really excited to have them here tonight to discuss a poetry collection called Gates by Sahar Muradi. And before we get started, maybe we can just briefly introduce ourselves. I am Lucy, and I'm a library tech, and I work in the youth department. I also do adult programming. I love being part of these book discussions. So.
I can go next. My name is Marisa. I am also a library tech. I work in the outreach department, making sure that everyone has access to the library and feels welcome.
And my name is Jacob, and I'm also a member of the outreach department. And as Lucy said, love these book discussions. So I'm just glad to be here.
Hi, my name is Lauren, and I work on the desk at the library. And I've also participated in a couple of these Unerased Book Club discussions, and I'm excited for this one.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fatema Haque. I am a co-facilitator for the Unerased Book Club, and I'm also the outgoing president of Rising Voices. It is a nonprofit focusing on organizing Asian American women and families for power. And just a visual description of me, I'm a Bangladeshi American woman. I have a digital background with pink clouds and blue skies.
And hey everyone, my name is Sheela. I am the founder or starter, I guess, of the book club, but co-facilitate with Fatema. And I'm super excited that we have 4 people here to talk about poetry. So I want to show well, I have green screen, so I can't really show it.
Here, I can show. I got it right.
Fantastic.
Oh, look at us. We're all so prepared.
Photocopy.
Just wanted to show like the beautiful cover of.
Yeah, it is so beautiful.
Of this work of poetry. And just for a little bit of context for people who might be watching this later, part of what Unerased Book Club does is take books that represent the vast diversity within the community, or like Asian American community, but also pick a vast array of types of books as well. And so it just so happened that I could find an Afghani American poet, and I thought, well, this feels like an incredible find. So we do recognize that it may have been a little bit hard to procure because it was a limited run, but we hope that anybody who got a chance to read it enjoyed it as much as I did, at least. So I'd love to open it up and just ask the big and foundational question. How did this book make you feel?
I would say challenged, but in a good way, in that some of it seemed like accessible to me right off the top. A lot of it seemed a little bit more, not cryptic, but I was going to need to do more work. And I found it so gratifying to do that work and to kind of get more and more out of the poems. I haven't really taken a chapbook and just read it through and then read it multiple times to get multiple things out of it. And so I found it a really enjoyable experience.
I found that I really had to kind of crank my brain into a whole different gear to read poetry, and not alone poetry like this as well. Like Lucy said, some parts were easily accessible, some parts not so much. I was very thankful for the part in the back that had a lot of explanation. I think what it also made me do is, because there was so much I didn't understand in the book itself, and also I think with poetry, I don't really need to understand everything. I can kind of just be like, oh, that's cool words. But I had to look up certain parts of history about Afghanistan, the history of the Taliban, so on and so forth. So that was something really kind of unexpected that came from this reading experience for me, at least.
Yeah, I found myself after reading this book thinking, gosh, I wonder what other people will say about this book, because I don't know if I have too much to say per se, but I also felt like, yes, like Jacob said, grateful for the notes in the back that helped me access some of the allusions, some of the jokes. I felt like I enjoyed. I did not read it multiple times, so I'm so glad that at least one of us did. I did get, I like when I read books of poetry to read them out loud. And again, similar to Jacob, yeah, that's cool words. Like I like the sounds of some of these words. I like the way some of the poems are structured, and I'm excited to get into that with you all.
Yeah, likewise. Challenging. There were parts that were really beautiful. There's parts that definitely like went straight over my head.
One thing I would add to, like Jacob saying he had to do extra research outside of what was in the notes, and I think it was interesting how she provided some notes, but she didn't provide everything. And so I found myself thinking that's another gate, right? Like that we had to open if we wanted to know more. We had to kind of, or we could open as many gates as we wanted, but once I started putting the word gates in front of everything I was reading with this, I was like, oh, wow, that's a gate. So I like that other people were looking things up too.
Yeah, Jacob, I really like that you brought up how much you had to read and learn, even like with modern history, where being an American, we're like actively complicit in, and how little as people in the country that was like the most recent colonizing power, how little we know about Afghanistan as a country, as Afghan culture, like Afghan poetry, and how kind of ridiculous that constantly feels just like not know anything about the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt the exact same way. This book was a lot of work, and I wasn't necessarily anticipating that. I do on some level, because poetry is always work for me. It is not my preferred genre of literature, but I really appreciated it. I think like even with the very first poem, I think I got like halfway through the page and I was like, oh, this is a Friends reference, all like it's like titles of episodes of Friends, and the combination of like Afghani history and like the history of like having to leave your country and come to a foreign country, and then combining that with such a cultural phenomenon that I feel like everybody just kind of gravitates towards, right? Like Friends aired in Bangladesh and in lots of, like anywhere I went in Asia, it was always on TV, dubbed or otherwise. And so I thought that was just like little things like that would hit me over and over again. I think there was, for the Salamu Alaikum poem, I didn't realize, I was like, these phrases seem familiar, and then I was like, oh, these are all greetings, like in it, and different variations of greetings, and I was like, I know some of these because my Afghani students would use them, right? It's on page 19, and so it was just like, and with each one it becomes more and more like weary, more tired, more just like along with what's happening, right? So you go from this really lighthearted, normal greetings to more painful ones. So there's layers and layers, and as Lucy mentioned, there's gates to go through it. So the book definitely made me work hard, but I appreciated that.
It's funny because it made me work hard, and there were definitely phrases or words that I Googled and like some general history stuff, but then there's other parts that I don't even know what to Google, that like it's right. In some ways so outside of my experience that I don't even know what I'm missing or I'm not understanding.
Fatema, I love that you brought up with the first poem the Friends reference, because I caught that immediately and I was like, wait, why? And I was like, I can't, like, I thought it was too weird to like use that style of the episode title as the repetitive sentence structure throughout the poem. And like I left the post-it note I have on this poem is, what is the one? I couldn't find a solution. Like I felt very frustrated that I couldn't find the pattern beyond Friends. But you're right, like that's definitely a cultural export that's all over the world, and that a lot of people equate with what is American culture.
Can I just jump in here and get clarification? I haven't watched an episode of Friends in a long time. Are they all titled this way, like the one that belonged to her?
Like not that exact line, that wouldn't be a title, but it's like the one that.
Okay, thank you. I
And I've
totally
never-
missed that.
I've never seen an episode of Friends. I'm just Indian American, so like I just know people who've seen a lot of Friends.
Yeah, sure. Okay, all right.
This first poem, I felt like I could get my claws in a little bit deeper. I was like, what is, the one that, what is the one? And to answer Sheila's question, and this might be baloney, but each line is almost like it's a gate itself, something that somebody has to go through. It's a passageway. It's gates. The title is Gates. So like, for example, the one we couldn't talk about ever, the one we tried to jump and failed, the one he jumped and wasn't forgiven. They're all they're entry points, they're exit points, they're passageways, they're throughways. And I just started yelling in my brain, yelling the word gates. They're gates.
I did the same thing. I have a post-it here that's like barriers, ? Access ? Entries, paths. What are these? And then I looked at the cover and I'm like, oh, all those are words for gates. So it took me a minute. And she puts these little gates at the top of every poem, but you gotta pay attention. And I kind of loved that. So
when you're reading something and you figured it out, or you think you figured it out, there's that boost of serotonin, and I was like, this is nice.
Yeah.
Lauren, you mentioned in your introduction to how the book made you feel, like the structure of the poems. And I'm curious if there are any in particular that you really liked or really did not like.
Sure. Two come to mind. Kabul comes to mind. And then I think it's We Flew Out of San Jose. Is that the title of it? We Flew Out of San Jose and You Told Me. So Kabul is on page 6, and We Flew Out of San Jose and You Told Me is page 24. Kabul was useful to me in this just way of like explaining Afghanistan to me as someone who is not, I did not know most of the places that were alluded to or that were mentioned in this poem, and what the significance of them is. And I'm again grateful for the glossary or the glosses in the back of like explaining that one such of these. So for just to explain, the poem Kabul has lists places in italics, sites in Afghanistan, and then describes something. It doesn't like explicitly describe it, but something happened here. Like Bamiyan was in 2 vacuums and lost my breath, but I did not cry, seeing the women in the field balance pots on their wisdom bumps. When you read that in the notes, she gives you this context that particular place is has traces to Afghanistan's Buddhist past, including the monumental Buddhist statues blown up by the Taliban in March 2001, which I remember as a high school student learning about that, the destruction of this colossal statue, and that's it. That's all I remember. That's all I know. Rather than what's behind that? Why is that significant? What else is going on inside Afghanistan? And another place that she mentions in this poem is a place like a lake or a reservoir that people out in Kabul, families go to picnic. And I don't know. I just liked that the structure helped me kind of just wend my way around in a macro way, Afghanistan. And I don't know. I also liked a particular line from that poem. So, I mean, outside of this question of structure, one of my favorite lines is just like in Mazar, there are 3 parts, and the third part just says, "Better than a man, Tarashak on a hot day." And I'm so glad that was listed in the back as like a very nice type of ice cream. It sounded very refreshing, and I love that line. I like laughed after I read the note. I was like, oh, okay. And then the second poem that I mentioned that I liked the structure of, We Flew Out of San Jose and You Told Me. It's like I'll just show it. Like there's this side by side structure where there's a story I interpret it as like a story told from two different vantage points, and it's a story about butterflies. So there you go. You've got almost the wings right there in the structure of the poem. I loved reading that out loud to myself, and experiencing it two ways. I learned also something about butterflies.
Lauren, these were the exact same two that were my favorites. I have little stars that I put right by them. I don't know if I have a whole lot to add, but yeah, these two were my favorites. So beautiful, both of them. And the San Jose one, I just love. It's just a perfect poem. It really is, of like, here's what I told you, and then here's what I heard you say. I love the structure. I thought it was just, I don't know. I really like that one a lot.
Something that I appreciated about, Cobble, the poem where they're listening to different locations, is perhaps when I go into reading a particular book, I think that I have an understanding of what I'm about to read, or that I have an understanding of the author or where the author comes from. And as I'm reading these different, these different stanzas paired with these different locations in Afghanistan, I was reminded that I surely don't understand what Afghanistan is like, or what I had thought before is nowhere near what I had understood. And I think that poem, at least for a reader, a white reader like me, was a very worthwhile experience.
I literally have on my post-it, what are childhood memories? What are collective memories? Because obviously they're very specific memories, but we could never know if they're hers, if they're people she knows, if they're ideas of people, and those memories. And this idea, I love that you said, like, you think you have an idea of a place, but you really don't know what's made up and what isn't. And I don't think it was, but like the Orientalist, sorry, just the thinking about the Orientalism and like, what do we think? Like, what type of perspective are we superimposing on the words?
Yeah, I was just going to add a note, like when you were saying what is made up and what's not and what's her experience. I find it difficult to, like, I have to remind myself when I'm reading poetry, this is not necessarily autobiographical, you know. And I think, like, from a library perspective, poetry is shelved in nonfiction, but that doesn't mean that it's nonfiction. And so, you know, you want to find out about the poet and try to apply this to their life, but it's like, that doesn't, they could just be making something up, or, you know, they could be putting together some interesting words that are and don't necessarily mean something. So it's a good to keep reminding myself, it doesn't have to be her story, you know.
So this question may not have an answer, but I'm curious, why is poetry shelved under nonfiction?
I don't know. I mean,
yeah, that's a great question.
I don't know. And I think it's misleading, because then when you're, especially if you're a poet, then you have to think, like, if I write this, do people think this is about me? Yeah. You know?
Very true.
If poetry is not under nonfiction, would it then be under fiction? Because that also feels wrong.
To that point, I recently learned that most nonfiction doesn't undergo the same like rigors as a lot, like academic writing, for instance. There's no requirement for fact checking because authors have to pay for that out of their own pocket instead of through publishing, because it costs so much. And so the question there is, with a lot of nonfiction, is it pure nonfiction?
Very debatable. I do think that she addresses this very same thing in the poem on page 29, where she says, most of the tragedy happens off stage, an arm, a leg exploded cinema. In the old city, poets run their fingers through the film. It is a double picture, the arm, the leg, then cinematic. White space, disremembering what mothers remember. And so, like, this idea of where she actually refers to the poet and herself being a poet, and how having access to this almost secondhand at times. And so like I thought that that was pointed for me, because she uses a lot of I and my or ours or we in previous poems, but here she kind of steps back and looks at it. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that poem had one of my favorite lines or little stanza where it's the white space disremembering what mothers remember. And I just particularly, I think it's interesting when you use the word remember in that way, not as recall, but remember, and to refer back to the body parts. I just, that play on words, I think was really interesting. Putting something back together rather than bringing it back to mind, or it could be both.
I want to just throw another line in. I don't have an observation about it, but to our discussion or our examination of what poetry is, I liked that in the book, in the poem Kabul, again on page 7, underneath the location puncture. The line really hit me there. The couplet, the different, whatever we call it, 2 lines. The difference between a poem and a lion is an alphabet. The difference between 5 poems and 5 lions is slight. I loved that. And puncture, I got glossed for me. I did not know what it was. The Valley of Five Lions, I believe. I don't know. I guess just like, I love language. I love words. I love this idea that like the difference between 5 poems and 5 lions is slight. And I just liked thinking about that. I thought that was a powerful line. And if we're talking, go ahead. Sorry, I think I'm done.
Go ahead. Just now that you've read it and like brought it up again. So in Hindi and Urdu poetry, and then kind of by extension, I'm assuming Daro poetry as well. This would definitely be a couplet. Like poetry is written as a couplet, and this type of structure is very common, where it's part of it is repetitive.
Okay.
But because I saw the note in the back that poems and 5 lions, there's only like a slight like vowel difference in the written words. And again, at least like, I'm extrapolating from Urdu and Hindi poetry, but that play on words is very, very common. And that play on like the slight difference in writing or like in the alphabet. And so I really love that she takes that structure, translates it not only into English, but translates it into like an English literature culture.
Wow.
Yeah.
I figured that there were a lot of layers to to these poems, and I felt a bit bad that I did only read what I could, read the book, read it once, and read a few out loud multiple times to myself. But I do, yeah. I'm glad again to be having this conversation and learning a lot.
I'm really curious, for those who looked into it, like what are some of the new things that you learned about Afghanistan or the US relations, or anything that you observed?
I don't know what this says. I don't know what this says, but what I learned the most from learning about the history of Afghanistan is I learned so much about America. And I kind of looked at it like maybe somebody would look at like a Agatha Christie book. It's like, why would America do what they're doing? Why would, you know what I'm saying? And I kind of looked at it that way, and it was just, it made me ask big old questions about American history, what America wants, what America is. What I also learned is that the history of the Taliban is super complicated, and that it is a thing that has taken 50 years, and how we see how it exists today is different from how it existed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 40 years ago. I learned a lot.
Yeah, I want to just add to that. I didn't do a lot of research, so but I just want to say I read the notes in the back and thought, oh my gosh, like there's more to learn about, yeah, specifically the Taliban, right? I've told you already that Kabul was such an incredible poem to me because, I was learning about I was reminded of certain locations that I had read about or heard in the news as a boy. As a teen, and then I some were new, but I want to just mention the poem. A word is legged. That was the poem for me that really introduced to me, I can't even pronounce his name, President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor from 1977 to 1981, right? Zbigniew Brzezinski. Oh my gosh, please, someone save me here. I just, no one can. Jacob's like, no, you don't get saved. You just get to sit here.
We don't know how to say it either. Come on now.
I thought you did an excellent job.
Okay, thank you,
Brzezinski,
Fatema.
yes.
Okay, yeah, and just his line that gets a direct quote in the poem, right? A curious complex. They don't like foreigners with guns in their country. I mean, where's the what? This is the national security advisor to the United States of America we're talking about, right? Like, and this is an observation that he shares about the people of Afghanistan. It's like, we're missing something here. Like as if, and then I'm sorry, let me just go ahead and quote the rest of the poem because I liked it. And I mean, where was it? As in someone must, right? That's what the poet, Sahar Muradi says at the end of that. And I just like, whoa, yeah, like, can we, I do feel as if, and I felt this way as a teen, when the United States invaded Afghanistan, bombed Afghanistan, was a feeling of sort of whiplash, and a feeling a bit like, I felt that even more, as Iraq was invaded and bombed as well. I felt like, whoa. And I've got the little political cartoons in my as my high school newspaper to back me up. I'm just like, I don't understand this. Why are we doing this? And the feeling of like, we don't have any knowledge. We don't have a base. We did not. It betrays an incredible amount of like hubris and lack of humility when you do not understand a place that you're going to insinuate yourself into. And it makes me think about, well, why do we get to do that? What are the conditions that facilitate that massive, breathtaking level of ignorance at the highest level of government?
So
Well, also, oh, sorry. No,
go ahead, Lucy, please.
I was just saying that Brzezinski also, like his actions he helped arm the Mujahideen, essentially, that led to the rise of the Taliban. So it's like, they don't like foreigners with guns, but let's arm them. I mean, yeah, yeah. I have nothing else to add to that. But.
And the same people, we put our nose in their business. Oh.
No, go ahead, Jacob, please.
No. Oh, the same people that we put our nose in their business in the early 80s because Russia was there, and we're like, Russia, you can't do nothing. So we're gonna go mess with these people who have nothing to do with it. It's a proxy war with Russia, and we're gonna mess with civilian lives. What? That's wild. I don't mean to. It's like, and the same people that we armed to fight the people that Russia had armed are the very people who would then 9/11, so on and so forth. It's like, oh my God. Huh.
But it wasn't people who did 9/11. That was Saudi. So it's like the conflict.
This is where I need to stop talking because I say the wrong thing and I get confused and I don't really know. I barely know. But okay, I tried it.
Which again, like, is more, to me, is more a conversation.
It speaks to
how we are like just not educated or like not told the truth. And that we are expected to just go along with one narrative, which is, I think, ties back directly to a lot of the poetry here, which is, we can't know one narrative. We can know multiple. We can derive some semblance of truth from as many narratives as possible. But we are not provided that luxury or that treatment as like an adult. Like, we're not treated as adults by the media.
Oof.
So that's, I mean, you were really right there. I was just gonna say, this poem was my favorite. I like marked it and I don't know if it's because I find myself more drawn to poetry that allows me to not fact check, but like contextualize it and get rid of like the gray area of it. I don't know if this is somebody's reality or not, but like she has citations in here. I'm like, oh, I love citations. And then I just really wanted to quickly cite a board game called Pax Pamir. My husband has it. It's a really intense game, but it's all about like what is cited in this book. I think it's cited. No, it's not in this. Sorry, not in this poem. But like Afghanistan has always been seen as the Great Game. And in the late 1800s, there was a bunch of different foreign powers trying to take over / destabilize, and that has never really gone away. And it is mentioned in here, I think on the back, like that Afghanistan was never colonized, but it's always been under occupation. And those are like, where do you draw the line? And then I do want to cite probably my new favorite TV show, Murdoch Mysteries. It's a Canadian show. It's on Acorn and Hulu, but one of the characters in there fought in Afghanistan. And it was so jarring to hear that for the first time because it's set in the 1800s.
Yeah, Sheela, thanks for bringing a lot of things up just then. But one thing that you said just then at the end, I want to just tack onto and say that was a lesson for me in this particular poem of connecting. But I was aware, because that's sort of when I became politically came online, so to speak, was in my teens, like after 9/11 and its aftermath. But connecting the history of Afghanistan and its occupation, right back to the 19th century. In that poem, this poem, A Word is Legged, did that in miniature. And I did feel something akin to what Lucy was mentioning at the very beginning here, which is just like, this is a gate I can pass through if I make the effort to, because this is not going to be given to me, and certainly not by my the media diet that I'm exposed to or fed here in America. I just had this sense of like disquiet, and I wasn't in a community at that time when we could really like try to wrap our minds around what are we doing halfway around the world and why. It just wasn't, and I'm hopeful that, yada, yada, we're kind of turning a corner as a culture where more and more people are aware of that there isn't a single narrative that we can just take at face value and go, okay, this is it. This is the grand narrative that we can accept. No, like, it's okay. It's good that we have, a disjointed, sort of like a fragmented look at things. And I love that poetry in particular, for me, it invites me to look at something from various angles, and in its structure, in the spaces between couplets. I mean, everything about just silences. When I say it out loud, it helps me. And I think that this was conducive to my learning. This poetry, and yeah.
Something that I kind of noticed was in one of the earlier poems, It's a Place to Live, which in one of the notes said it was inspired by Marianne Moore's The Steeplejack poem, which is sort of like the beginning is more close up, idyllic views of a town, and then it kind of zooms out and you get, or the other way around. It starts more zoomed out and then it goes in, and it seems like maybe it's not as perfect as it seems. And I was realizing when we were talking about some of those later poems, how kind of the whole book also kind of reflects that whole structure, where it starts more zoomed out in a way and more idyllic, and like the introduction to Afghanistan, where the Kabul poem, and then it definitely, I think that everything is political in a way. So I won't say like the beginning is less political, because it also certainly is, but it definitely, to me, becomes more explicitly political, where they are explicitly talking about colonization and the war the further you get into the book, which I think is an interesting structure overall as the book, since it's not that long. I only read it twice, and both times I read it like all together. I didn't really take breaks, but it's only something that I'm noticing now that we were talking about some of those later poems.
Sorry, missed it, Marisa. Are you saying Run that by me again. Sorry, I missed it. The structure you're talking about, how the structure mimics the or it's mentioned in the notes on the back that it's
Go ahead. One of the notes was about a poem that she based a poem off of, but also it seems like the whole structure of the book is similar to that, in that it starts more idyllic and kind of a zoomed out. I don't even want to say rosy, but like it has like the Cobble poem. There's a lot of like nostalgia in there also, and then as it goes on, it kind of becomes more explicitly political, where she's talking about colonization and the war, and you know, she's more explicitly talking about it's the line of like body parts, and like we authored poorer nations with the hope of freeing others, and just different the, you know, the person blowing up and that kind of stuff. I'm just rambling at this point, but
no, thank you. I mean, thanks for more. I mean, yeah, I felt like this was a very sophisticated book of poems, and so it's useful just to have a sense of what's going on, what other people are noticing. I have a question I just want to insert, and we don't need to touch, but speaking of, you know, body parts, speaking of organs, there was another poem that I liked called Funny Organs, right? I read that out loud to myself several times. I felt like I don't know, is her father, the poet's father, hospitalized for some sort of organ failure or ailment?
I think they said he had stomach cancer in one of the other notes for a different poem.
Okay. I didn't understand this poem at all on page 25. I didn't, but I enjoyed the just reading it out loud, and I felt like there were other poems in this book that dealt with her dad's hospitalization or memories of her dad, or mentioned. I don't know. I just want to throw it out there because I'm curious to learn from you all, maybe what you all caught in terms of the poet's relationship to her dad.
I think the poem "Fathers on the Tongue" is sort of, once I read it a couple times and then realized her father had been hospitalized, and then I read an interview with her or something where she was talking about like having this dying father in the background. So I do think it's something that she references there, and like in Fathers on the Tongue, and I'm not sure I understood that whole poem, but there were parts of it where it seemed like whoever Tom is, it's like her father's just a body, almost like he, you know, she talks about flipping her father over like for care, for, you know, in a bed where before he's been working in a fish market with those bodies. And so I do think that there was definitely some reference there, I thought, with her father. And I had to read over that one a bunch of times to even get something out of it. But you know, that I think that was, and then she talks in her notes about their specific places, like St. Mary's is where her father had treatment, and there's a street that's in West Palm Beach. So I think, you know, there's definitely personal autobiographical information in there.
Yeah, her dad asked the question in that poem, like, do you know what Peshmerga means? And like that, I want to know more about the Peshmerga, mm-hmm. You know, that's noted in the back as well, kind of explicitly, like almost like a challenge to me when I read that in the notes, because I was like, well, I mean, the poem, it's explained at the end of this poem what the word means. Pesh for early, Murga for death. And then the last line is Hell's Angels. That's why I feel like, gosh, it would just be great to like just read that whole poem out loud right now as a public service to anyone who is like interested in this book. I thought it was just like a great poem, another great one. But like, you know, here's like, I felt like a lot of that particular poem was like snippets between her observations at the hospital, her dad's dying process, the person, probably the caregiver who's assigned to help her dad, the chit chat that goes on between her and that person, and then her dad talking to her. It felt like I was in the waiting room. It felt like I was in the, that her father's next to her father's hospital bed, really brought me there. Although I did not understand most of the poem, probably, if you were to ask me what's going on there. Yeah.
And I also wondered in that poem if there was part of like an evacuation or having to leave a place. She talks about like, let's leave before father's a channel of peppercorns, but then later they talk about what's the safest street to take, and talk about leaflets are being dropped and then pieces being dropped. So there's this whole other part that I wasn't sure what it was about, but there was a lot in there to sort of begin to try and parse out, I think.
Yeah, and although I almost felt like, it's not really for me to like really, I just didn't have the bandwidth maybe to like get every piece of that, but I felt it was very true, even though like it felt very true to life. It felt like, again, it sort of transported me to a particular place, this poem, because it just felt like, this is like looking at a life event from a lot of different angles, and there's a lot going on. And anyway, I felt it was very beautiful.
I mean, yeah, I, like Lucy, read it multiple times, and like you, Lauren, read it multiple times. This was actually, like Jacob mentioned earlier with the first poem, and having that aha moment with Gates, aha moment of, oh my God, I figured out like the narrative in this. And figured out meaning like, Lauren, you and I had like a very similar read of, this is her father undergoing treatment for an ailment. And there's this guy, Tom, who is a caretaker, but used to work in service, or like more directly in service, and had a more bodily, like labor intensive type of field. So he's used to having to flip humans over or like carry them. And it was a more visceral, or like it seemed much more personal in its writing than a lot of the other poetry, which, while impactful, felt a little bit at arm's length.
I like the repetitions between that one and funny organs. I mean, like the lines bisected by a green line, and then the repetition of like red, black, and green, and then also the different colors that were mentioned. And I was like, I wish I knew more about like how cancer is like, like how doctors show what parts are cancerous. Like they use like markers and things, right, to draw on the body itself sometimes. And so I was wondering if that's what she was referring to, or if it was like something deeper. Like it works on so many different levels, and so I left myself feeling like I was like, you're right, this is Gates inside of Gates inside of Gates. But I was also just very curious about the use of colors in funny organs, because I couldn't decipher them.
It's interesting how we all read them differently. I read that one as more about like the flags, like the red, black, and green, since that's the colors of the Afghan flag, and the white, 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 red, and blue, where she's sort of talking about like what I was reading as like a shock and awe military thing of like all this white bursting, and upon a scale that sounds a light worth. I don't know if I'm reading that right either. But
that's I did think about the flag as well, especially as it like near half a million Afghani, like that's another way of saying how many people died, right?
Which I think is like the very first lines, funny organs bleed the same, ache discordantly, of like that we are the same inside, but we still are different. I don't know. I don't know what it means that we bleed the same, but the ache discordantly is also so interesting. I don't know, different goals maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, although it's very a mysterious poem to me, or cryptic in some ways, I guess. I definitely had a very strong sense of this being like of a body or multiple bodies, and almost like, I don't know, not in like a pleasant way, like a body under stress, or like a wounded body, a sick body, or bodies. But it's interesting, I had not made that connection between like this person, maybe a single body suffering, and like maybe this is about nations, maybe this is about, like the last line, like othering costs. Like it hurt both ways, coloring bars and othering costs. It made me like wonder if we're talking, what are those costs we're talking about? I loved reading this poem out loud to myself.
It's interesting because even in having this discussion about this book, like, I think you can leave a book discussion and be really feel energetic and excited about what you talked about, and you're like, that was a great book, and I read it, and I feel like I'm taking part in this discussion, and I'm like, this is so interesting, I'm going to need to read this again. And it's just there's, as we've been saying, so many layers, and everything everyone's saying, it's like, oh, okay, well, wait, now I need to go back and I need to read it again.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to read that again, I need to read this poem again. And even why are the poems in the order that they are in? And there's just so much to think about.
In an interview that I watched with her, since that's how I was also trying to grasp onto this book, it was with I think the Asian American Writers Workshop. That's how I found it on YouTube, at least. But she was talking about her mom and how her mom had introduced her to poetry. And she said when they left Afghanistan, one of the only things they brought was a book of poetry by a Persian art poet from like the 14th century. And I think that's so fascinating that is literally one of the things you grab when you're fleeing. And then she also was talking about how there's a cultural tradition to kind of use poetry as a horoscope almost, and like an oracle. I don't know if that's like the right way to say it. But I was thinking about that too when I read it the second time, of like how something like this would be used as a horoscope or an oracle of some kind.
That is absolutely terrifying. The prophecies. Wow.
Well, I know we're at the top of the hour, and I just really sincerely thank every single one of you for reading this book and engaging in an incredible conversation. Poetry, like much like Fatema, like I'm not really a poetry reader, but I love conversations about poetry. And I could not have said that like a few years ago, but this is one of my favorite types of literature to talk about, because it just like reflects so much about what we know and don't know about the world around us. So I just want to say thank you. And I'm so glad that Ann Arbor District Library continues to invest in these conversations.
Yeah, deeply appreciative of how deeply you dove into these poems, the fact that you read them over and over again, looked at interviews, tried to learn the history, or like learn context. Really appreciate it, your engagement with it. Lovely.
And thank you both for facilitating the conversation, and also for choosing this book and putting it in our hands, I would say, because I think that we're all saying it was a challenge. It seems like it was a challenge that we all were happy to undertake, and I think have learned a lot from doing so. So I really, really appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.